G'day crew. This is part 2 of my previous on-water video. In this episode I'll be talking a bit about catching and keeping live bait. I'll talk about the rods and tackle I used on the last trip, as well as the rather surprising contents of the crab pots I dropped. I'll also cover looking after your leftover live bait so that you can use it as dead bait on the next trip, plus a few other things that you may find interesting. I hope you get some useful information out of it. Let's go. I brought my heavy rod out with me again this time. That's the really heavy one. It's running my old Alvi reel, spooled with 100-pound mainline. It's actually a 100-pound Troll Pro leader, but there's 100 metres in the spool and I used it all as a mainline. And it has 250-pound leader. The last time I had this out was to catch the Tusky near the end of 2025. This time I have in mind to have my revenge on the sharks that have been plaguing me at Harry's for the last few trips by having some sport with them and getting one to the boat. If I get a bigger one, you can't kill it because there are maximum size limits, but there's nothing stopping you having the fun of fighting it to the boat. There was so much bait around on the day that it didn't seem to matter where I looked, I found some. You get days like this, just not often enough. I eventually settled on this spot at Harry's as I felt that not only could I get the bait, but it offered a chance at a larger fish or a shark. A lot of people prefer the hollow Sabiki rods so that they can store the hooks safely down the middle. I do have one, but I don't like it. Far too stiff. I've been told that there's now better and softer hollow Sabiki rods available, but I haven't come across one in the tackle shop to have a good look at it yet, and I'd have to say that I'm kind of reluctant to change what works for me. Here I have what I consider the perfect combination. I have a Penn Battle 2 rod rated for 10 to 30 pound braid with an extra fast action. I've matched that with a Penn Battle 2 reel in 4000 size, spooled with 20 pound Power Pro braid. I use a few metres of 20 pound Troll Pro wind-on leader, mainly in case I want to press the rod into service for another form of fishing while I'm out. Depending on what you want to do with it, you could go braid all the way. In my opinion, the way that I pack the Sabiki rig on a normal rod makes it almost as safe as having a hollow rod. I've never had an issue with it. Another consideration is that the length of the rod is perfect for the average length of the Sabiki rigs that I use and the length of my arms to reach the sinker as it comes up. Then I put the sinker in my left hand and use my right hand with the de-hooker to remove the fish, and again I can reach all the fish on all 6 hooks with this setup. That's an important consideration when you're fishing by yourself. I also find that the extra fast action of the rod is a good match for my jigging technique. Not that there's any science behind my technique, I just move the rod up and down. But I've done that with several different rods now, and with this rod I get the best results. If you keep an eye on the sounder screens, you'll notice that sometimes there's very little bait showing, yet I can still pull up the odd few. You'll also notice that sometimes there's nothing showing on the 2D screens, yet there is a good showing on the 3D screen off to the side of the boat. In this circumstance, I think what's happening is that I'm picking up the odd few that are wandering out away from the rest of the school. And sometimes there's so much bait on the sounder that you have to wonder why I'm not pulling up a full string on the Sabiki. And part of the reason for that is the way I do it. I strike and wind as soon as I feel the first bite. With some bait species, it's fine to leave your rig down there for a few seconds after the first bite, while some of the others jump on. But there's other species that will swim upwards as soon as they're hooked. and you end up with a hopelessly tangled sabiki rig. There's been times where I've gone through several sabiki rigs on a single trip because of this. So in order to preserve my rigs these days, I generally start winding as soon as I get a strike. If that means that I don't get a full string, then so be it. I have wondered whether a heavier sinker might help. I have 4 ounces on it at the moment, but I do worry that putting a heavier sinker on it will change the action and maybe that won't do as good. The 4 ounce seems to be working just fine. When the bait is on or very near the bottom, you can drop your sabiki rig down until it stops, and if you haven't got anything on it already, give it a few jigs and you soon will have. Another tip is to slow it down as it drops, and the fish will often take it on the way down. On the other hand, if the bait is up in the water column, it pays to have your reel spooled with multicolour braid. That way you know the depth that the fish are holding at on the sounder, and you can just count the colours until you have dropped down through the bait school and then start jigging as you wind up. I got a few whiting on the sabiki at one point. There must have been a school of them went through. They all looked like summer whiting to me. I couldn't see any of the darker spots that are typical of a winter whiting, although they are hard to see on some winter whiting as well. I did measure them all and they all went pretty close to 23 centimetres. And while 23 centimetres is legal for a summer whiting, it's too close to the limit for me to want to risk keeping it, even for bait. Had I measured them with a better ruler, and had I been confident that they were at least the 23 centimetre limit, and had I been going to use them for live bait immediately, then I would have. But, as I said in the beginning, one of my objectives was to gather bait for the next trip, so keeping a marginally legal fish that may shrink a bit with freezing wasn't an option. Also, just draw your attention to the de-hooker I'm using to get the bait fish off the hooks without touching them. One very good reason for using the de-hooker and not getting your hands anywhere near those little hooks is that they are sharp and they go in very easily. They're so thin. In fact, they go in a lot easier than they come out. Don't ask me how I know. But there's also another good reason, and that is that touching the bait fish can shorten their lives. How susceptible they are to that depends a bit on the species. Some species are much hardier than others. I find that herring are a bit delicate, and if you touch them too much they won't last long. There's a link down in the video description where you can buy one of these de-hookers if you want one. I've tried several and this is the best I've come across. And another good thing about this particular de-hooker is that the handle floats. And why would that matter, you wonder? Things can get pretty active when the fish are really on. You're pulling up strings on the sabiki. And if the weather's a bit rough, well, there's a couple of times this has gone overboard on me. Fortunately, the landing net was handy and I was able to grab that and scoop it up before it got too far away. But if the handle didn't float, it would have been lost. Sometimes you'll get a fish that just swallows the hook and you can't get it off with the de-hooker. Retrieving the hook isn't very hard, but what it does mean is that usually the fish doesn't live. So rather than put it in your live bait tank, just put it straight in the esky and use it for dead bait. One of the key takeaways from all of these tips is that you need to be able to read your sounder and know what you're looking at. You need to be able to recognise the bait on your sounder. And that's the main reason I've left my sounder screens overlaid on this video while I've been talking. If you don't already know how to recognise bait on your sounder, you can safely assume that it will look somewhat similar to my 2D displays, regardless of what sounder brand you have. Of course, that assumes that you're looking at a 2D display. Down vision and side vision, entirely different. I try to adjust the water inlet so that the flow in matches the flow out. That's a pretty ideal situation, so long as the tank isn't overloaded with fish for its size. I can get away with a small overload of fish by increasing the flow in and allowing the excess to go out the top of the live bait well. I just don't close the lid tightly. The bilge pump looks after the overflow that makes it into the boat, and the rest of it just goes over the side. However, it's not ideal for keeping excess fish for very long. The other problem that I encounter is that the fish lose their scales in the live bait tank, and over time this clogs up the overflow and slows down the water that's getting out. I keep a length of 300-pound mono on board to shove down the overflow and help to clear it out when this happens. It's not a perfect solution, but it does help. Sometimes the hook will go in somewhere on the fish and it will be bleeding. In those cases, I don't put a bleeding fish into the live bait tank. It goes straight into the esky to use as dead bait later. For such a small fish, they can put a surprising amount of blood into the live bait well, and that seems to have a detrimental effect on the health of the other fish. Keep an eye on your live bait tank and remove any dead or dying fish as soon as you notice them. I don't know why, but if I get a few dead fish in my live bait tank, more seem to die. If I clear them out, all's good. So since discovering that, I remove them as soon as possible and put them in the esky to use as dead baits. I ended up getting quite a mixed bag of bait. There were at least 2 slimies, I think maybe a couple more, a handful of yakkers, a few small herring, but most of them were larger herring, which suited me just fine. And that's not to mention the several whiting and a couple of squire that I threw back. In this little clip, I'm putting one of the dead herrings on my sliding Snell rig. First, I need to scratch a few scales off the fish so I can get my hook in. I put the hook in under the skin and back out again, and then make sure there are no scales on the point when it comes back out. Then I just put the top hook through the nose. It doesn't matter much how you hook it through the nose, so long as there's enough barb exposed.
Oh, it's another shark. Yep, bit me off.
I'm using different sized baits at the moment. I have some leftover liveys from the previous trip to use as dead bait, and I'm pulling up some quite small herring as well as some larger ones. Plus the current is running fairly strong at the moment. And of course the object is to have my line get to the bottom, but not too fast. And all of that means that I need to have the correct amount of lead on the line for the current that's running and the size of the bait that I'm using. And those of you that have been watching my videos for a while will know that I always reach for Klik sinkers to provide a solution to this. And this time I'm going to try the glow variety. Putting a light on my rig always works when I'm deep dropping. And I've also had success by putting a light on my rig when I've been fishing at night in the bay. So using some sinkers that glow can't be a bad thing, and may just help.
Okay, there's plenty of weight on this one.
It didn't take very long for something to have a go at that rod with the glow sinker on it. Whatever it was just hit it, pulled a little bit of line on the bait runner, and then it stopped. I gave it a minute and then I thought I'd better pull it in because I'd probably at least been baited. But it was bitten off. It was quick and it was probably a shark.
I got one sinker back, I lost the other one.
But I was impressed at how quickly that line was hit with the glow sinker on. You can't assume much from one occurrence, that might have been just happenstance, but it does look promising. And I'm going to be using these a bit more in the future to see if it's repeatable. I'll just show you the rod and reel combo that I was using on the last on-water video. This is the one that got all the hits, or I think all bar one or two of the hits. This is a Shimano Raider rod. It's 8 to 10 kilos, 7 foot long, and they call it a heavy snapper spin rod. I don't know what that means for the action. I quite like it. It's got quite a good action on it. Good for snapper. I've caught a few snapper on it, caught a few other things on it. Lost a lot of fish on it actually, because I fished fairly light with this one. This did have 15-pound braid on it at first. Now I've got some 20-pound Power Pro braid on it and 20-pound Troll Pro leader. I'm running at least 5 meters of Troll Pro wind-on leader on it, and then I have the swivel and probably another meter or so of 20 or 30 pound bite leader. The reel's a Penn bait runner reel. I like the bait runners because you can set them up to let the fish have a run and just flip the lever and start fighting them. The reason I use the Power Pro braid for most of my reels now is that it's a 4-strand braid, and I'm on a bait, I don't really need to cast long distances, so you don't need the 8 or 12-strand braid. The 4-strand braid is much more abrasion resistant. I have been rubbed off a lot on structure, so I just thought that would help me a bit in that respect. But fishing light, the 20-pound line, going after the sort of fish I go after, snapper's fine, but most of the others, they can do me in on this rod. But on the same token, I take a heavy rod out, as I did last trip, and I didn't get any. I got 1 or 2 bites on it, that was all. So fishing light, get the bites, lose the fish. Fish heavy, don't get the bites, get the fish. Take your pick. I gathered as much bait as I wanted, or at least as much as the live tank could support for now. And I still had a few hours to put on the engine to complete the run-in period, so I decided to go for a bit of a troll. I didn't do any good trolling, but I did get the engine hours that I wanted. And with that accomplished, I decided to return to Harry's for a fishing session. You can see the track that I followed that's up on the map at the moment. Part 1 of the video covers the fishing session at Harry's. You've already seen that. If not, there's a link to it, and I'll put the link in the video description below as well. I managed to land a PB Queenfish, but I also had a lot of bust-offs. So having covered all of that in the previous video, we'll skip ahead to picking up the crab pots after that session.
Oh, okay. Lots of fish. Oh, little tusky. And I think the crabs are going to be small. Let's see what we can do about separating them and getting these fish back.
Now what have we got here? There's a tusky. I don't think he'll be legal, but even if he is, he's too small to bother filleting. There's a leather jacket. They're really nice eating, but they need to be a lot bigger than this. There's a small grass sweetlip in there somewhere. He's hiding at the moment, but I did see him. And there's also some sort of fish there that I don't recognise. So if anyone does recognise what it is, let me know in the comments, please. I'll put a circle around it so you know which one I'm talking about. I think that is the most fish that I've ever pulled up in a crab pot. With so many fish in there and only a couple of crabs, I figured it'd be quicker to just quickly check the crabs first and then tip the fish out. So that's what I did.
Yeah, that's more like it.
There's not as many fish in this one, but there are some better crabs. The crab with the circle around it is a hairy crab. There's no bag limits or size limits on these. They're usually fairly small compared to the sandies, but they are worth keeping. They're also known as tusky lollipops. So if you get any in your pots and you also chase tuskies, do keep them and freeze them for your next tusky hunt. With only a few fish in there, I thought it was quicker to throw the fish back this time and then measure the crabs. Unfortunately, there were more undersized crabs than I expected. They were only undersized by 0.5 millimetre or 1 millimetre, but they were undersized nevertheless. That was a bit disappointing because when I first pulled it up, I thought the majority might have been legal.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The third pot had still more small squire, but it also had the most legal crabs of any of the pots. Now this pot presented a bit of a dilemma because I needed to measure a few of the crabs, and yet the fish needed to go back as quickly as possible. In the finish, I grabbed the ones that I was sure of out, I measured the ones I wasn't sure of, and then I just picked it up and dumped the fish and the small crabs out. Happily, everything that I threw back swam away just fine.
Oh, I've got some more in this one. Oh, another load of fish too.
Once again, the last pot surprised me with the number of small squire that it contained. There was only one legal buck amongst it all, so I was able to get everything back in the water quite quickly. I've been searching for the crabs for the last 3 trips after not dropping a pot for a few months. On the first 2 trips I was only getting a few crabs out of my usual spots, so I decided to try a real departure and go deep, real deep. I dropped these pots in 15 metres of water at high tide. I got about the same number of crabs as I'd been getting on my previous trips, but what did surprise me was the number of squire that were in the pots. More than I think I've ever pulled up in the past. Instead of finding the crab honey hole I was looking for, it seems that I might have found the snapper nursery. If only I could find the snapper's old age home.
There was no shortage of livestock in the pots, but all I got was 6 keepers out of it. All the others were too small. I don't think I saw a jenny actually. Just a lot of small bucks and awful lot of fish. Anyway, that's enough to give my wife and I a feed, 1 feed of crabs. Well, maybe 2. I usually have 1 crab, she has 2. So might get 2 feeds out of that lot. I got these couple of hairy crabs. I don't mind them. They're tusky lollipops. So it's good to catch a couple of them every now and then. And of course there's this fella. Too big even for the cutting board. This hangs over the end of it. I missed some other fish. I think a couple of them were sharks, but I think at least one of them might have been another one of these guys. And I saw one jumping when I was leaving on the way to pick up the pots. So they're certainly around at the moment.
Not real fussed about the belly meat on most fish. Although I can't remember ever trying the belly meat on a queenfish, I decided I'd just cut it up for strip baits anyway. I generally find that the taste of the belly meat differs significantly from the rest of the fillet. I think that's probably because the belly meat of most animals has a higher fat content. Now this affects the flavour, often making it more intense, and that's great when you're talking about beef brisket or pork belly. However, it also affects the texture of the meat, making it much softer. Again, not a problem for beef brisket or pork belly because they have a firm enough texture anyway. But I find with fish, the texture tends to be too soft on the belly. To my wife and myself, the texture of the meat is at least as important as the flavour. We both prefer the firmer texture of the main fillet. I don't want to put you off trying the belly meat for yourself if you haven't done so already. It's extremely high in omega-3 fatty acids, and the belly meat in general is prized for sushi and sashimi. We just don't like either of those either. But there's no need to waste it. If you leave the skin on to provide some strength, the oily belly meat is a very good bait. And that's what I've done here. I've cut that belly meat into thin strip baits. I'll cryovac these up and freeze them for the next trip. I also decided to break the frame up to use as crab bait. There's still a lot of meat left between those bones. The crab pots that Mr. Bait sells have a large enough bait pocket built into them to accommodate larger baits like these. And those pots will fit a piece of this, a couple of half bits of mullet, and that'll see them set up for an overnight soak. There's no sense putting pots in for an overnight soak if they don't hold enough bait to see it through the night. And that brings us to looking after the leftover bait, ready for the next trip. I used to cryovac all the bait I bought, but I stopped doing it after a while and just separated the pilchards into smaller bags. That was quite easy with Mr. Bait's snap frozen pilchards, so I didn't really see the need to go to the trouble of cryovacking. I just kept my leftover live bait for burley for the next trip. However, a mate said I should be cryovacking my leftover bait and freezing it to use as dead bait on the next trip. So that's what I do now. I generally put 3 or 4 fish to each bag so that I don't need to thaw a heap of bait at once. Keeping whatever bait that you're using in the best possible condition is key to catching good fish. The home cryovac machines are cheap enough, and if you buy the rolls, you can cut them and seal them to whatever bag size you need. Far better than just buying the bags to use. I'll put some links down in the video description if you want to check them out and maybe get one for yourself. I think I mentioned in the previous video that queenfish is best eaten fresh if you're going to grill it, or wrap it in some foil to keep the moisture in and barbecue it. Of course, you have to treat it well beforehand, bleed it, etc. I've gone through all that in a previous video. And I think I also mentioned that queenfish doesn't freeze well. If you do have to freeze it because you got too much, don't grill it or barbecue it or anything like that. But there are ways to cook it that's very nice. And this is one example. I diced the queenfish meat into about 1 centimetre cubes, and my wife made a curry with it and served it on a bed of rice. Absolutely delicious. My wife's not real keen on being part of any videos, but I'll see if I can talk her into doing a video on how to prepare this next time we have it. It's a culinary delight. That's it for this video. I hope you got a few ideas from it to help you improve your fishing. Until next time, good fishing.